Thus the term coons was used to identify a black person. The Yamasee lived in Georgia on the Ocmulgee River near Macon, Georgia, and where the early Yamasee mounds were discovered. Today, Macon is also the home of the Harriet Tubman African American Museum. The Yamasee is the mother tribe of the Creeks, the Seminoles, the Apaches, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Catawbas, and the Cherokee. In the 1700s, the British, French, and Spaniards mixed into these tribes. In 1715, the Yamasee rose in rebellion against the English and allied with the Spaniards. Some of the Yamasee Creeks migrated to what is known as Savannah, Georgia, and became outlaws under the tribal name Yamacraw. The British began taking women and children into slavery. The native black American men mixed in with runaway African slaves. A war broke out between the Yamasee and the British in 1715, the Yamasee Uprising. Throughout the 1700s, many tribes were slaughtered. The remnants of these tribes band together to create an alliance. The newly formed tribes of Yamasee, Coosa, Cowan, Congaree were known as the Catawbas. The Catawbas spoke a dialect of ancient Cushite language, which was bits and pieces of the original Olmec African language. The Catawbas lived in South Carolina and were enemies of the Shawnee and the Iroquois, who were tribes that had mixed with the French and became almost full-blooded European. Some of the Catawbas joined the Alabama Creeks and mixed in with the Spaniards, losing much of their African traits. After the Yamasee Uprising, Native American power collapsed in Georgia and Alabama. Many of the Yamasee escaped to Florida, where they joined runaway African slaves to form what later would be called runaways or Seminoles. Other tribes which came from this union were the Oconee and the Hittite. The Oconee relocated from the Oconee River and moved westward to the Chattahoochee, where they mixed with the Lower Creeks, which resided in the areas of Pensacola and Tallahassee, Florida. All of these tribes were originally black tribes of the Yamasee. And as far as the Yamasee mixing with the African slaves, the Yamasee and African runaways had a few things in common. They were both of the same ethnic background, they were able to blend in with each other, and they both had hatred for the British. Throughout slavery, thousands of African slaves escaped the plantations and sought refuge with the neighboring Native American tribes. The natives had an incredible knowledge of outdoor survival and location. It is often believed that Harriet Tubman herself, who freed slaves via the Underground Railroad, was herself a black Native American because of her knowledge of the paths and the terrain. Many African slaves and Native Americans mixed. Even the red tribes took in African slaves. Some tribes even owned slaves. However, unlike the Europeans, Africans were mostly considered indentured servants and treated as human beings by their Native American owners. Today there are red Seminoles and black Seminoles, red Creeks and black Creeks, red Cherokee and black Cherokee. The Seminoles, they did oppose slavery. The U.S. Army prosecuted the Seminoles because they opposed slavery. The Seminoles realized that the people who were being sold into slavery were a faction of them, distant cousins, relatives in a way. The black Seminoles was the only tribe at the time that opposed slavery. U.S. slaveholders tried to cause tension between red Seminoles and black Seminoles. Thus, a war erupted between the Seminoles and the U.S. slaveholders. Seminoles and African slaves joined together and attacked slave plantations. General Andrew Jackson prepared to wipe out the Seminoles. Jackson gathered Creek tribes along the U.S. soldiers to destroy the Seminoles. This war lasted for decades and extended all throughout Florida. By 1826, wealthy Creeks who had also owned slaves were sent to persuade the Seminoles to join in on the slave trade. When the Seminoles once again refused, Seminoles were kidnapped and sold on the southern slave markets. The U.S. Army was also trying to push the Red Seminoles out of Florida onto reserved Indian territory west of the Mississippi. The Army was faced with much opposition, with the resistance of the Seminoles, who were guided by the Red Seminole chief Osceola. The Red Seminoles knew that the whites would not follow after them for their fear of alligators and snakes. The Black Seminoles remained in Texas and moved into Oklahoma, Idaho, and mixed in with the Blackfeet, Comanche, the Kiowa, Apache, the Mandan, the Omaha, Osage, Pawnee, and Arikara, and their closest relatives, the Wichita. People wonder if the actual Blackfoot Indians got their name because they were Black Americans. And, that's not necessarily so. The Blackfoot Indians got their name because they would stain their moccasins with burnt ashes. The Blackfoot tribe was at one time Saskatchewan Native Americans who relocated to the Montana in search for buffalo. The Blackfoot or Blackfeet consists of 3 divisions: the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piegan. The entire group is known as Blood and are descendants of the Wichita Yamasee Moors. If you look closely at many Native American tribes, you can still see their African traits. You may wonder, are there any black tribes left? There is a woman named Verdiachi Washita Turner Gaston L. Bay, and she is the legal heir by blood to the Mason Rouge land grants that were willed to her by her great-great-grandfather Henry Turner. Verdiachi's land is the District of Louisiana, which is named after her great-great-great-grandfather's friend, Louis Bogeny, who sold the land to Joseph de Maison Rouge in 1795. Joseph had a daughter named Anne, in which the land went to her. Annie named the land Louisiana after Louis and Annie. In 1848, the U.S. government took the Turners to court to take the District of Louisiana. However, the government lost, and the land was granted to the heirs of Henry Turner, Verdiachi Washita Turner Gaston L. Bay. Verdiachi has set up a sovereign nation of Washita Moors that is recognized by the United States government. The Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minority Workers Groups on Indigenous Populations recognized the Wichita as the oldest indigenous people on the earth. The U.S. government does not own the District of Louisiana, as we may believe. Also, the state of Georgia is owned by a Yamasee. It is documented. Many Native Americans signed treaties with the U.S. government, but never actually sold any of their land over. Technically, the land still belongs to the so-called Indians, not the federal government. So you may be wondering if I'm trying to say that out of the 550 some odd Native American tribes, they're all descendants of black people. I'm saying that all so-called American Indians descended from the Mexican Olmecs and the various African and Asian mixtures throughout. How does this make other Native Americans feel, especially today's Red Indian? It is important that we as Americans understand the origin of the so-called American Indian, and it is important that we accept the truth. Black Indians are no more native than the so-called red man in culture. The culture and religion that is practiced by today's Native Americans is the natural, non-theological concepts of the Malian Moors of Africa, the Olmecs, and the Aztecs of Mexico, as well as the early concept of the mound builders. There are various tribes today that will admit to their African ancestry. The Hopis, Apache, Aztec, Zuni, Nez Perce, Miami, Blackfoot, Catawba, and Seminole all possess knowledge of African ancestry. What's more important is not the feeling concerning indigenous people, but more so the truthful data and the validity and acceptance of that data. You may be asking, why do Red Native Americans believe that they are the first?